Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you're listening to us on, thank you guys so much for the support, messages, emails, tweets, all the things that you've sent my way, the show's way. I really, really appreciate all of that. I love the ideas that you guys send for topics, feedback that you give, and even those of you who ask to get in contact with some of the coaches that I've had on here is really, really cool to kind of build that network and have you guys get into contact with those guests is awesome. So really happy that you're joining us here. And we're going to talk some offense. We're going to talk a little bit on the X's and O's side, jump into some analytics as well. Specifically, our topic is going to be talking about implementing a 5-out offense. It's a real popular offense. It's one that I kind of look at as something that maybe on the surface seems simple to implement, but there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of individual player roles, team responsibilities. There's definitely ways to run it well. There's definitely ways to really get a lot out of it. And I'm really excited to get into that here with my guests. So if you love offense, if you love that side of the game, who doesn't love scoring? This will be a great episode. Really looking forward to bringing this one to you. Of course, I don't do this alone. I'm very happy to be joined by quite a busy individual here in the basketball and the coaching world. He does a lot of work on the analytics side, currently on the free agent market, so to speak, in terms of his coaching, but a lot of experience, a lot of basketball knowledge. Really happy to bring on to talk about implementing a 5-out offense, Coach George Buaku today. Coach, really appreciate you being able to spend some time talking to us today. How are we doing this evening?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Awesome. Coach, let's start with your basketball journey, your coaching journey. Like I said, I know you have your hand in a few different basketball and coaching related pots and have in the past as well. So go ahead and share with us, Coach. Where's this great game of basketball taking you? Where's your coaching journey taking you? And kind of where is it you're at right now?
Yeah, so I think kind of to sum up my kind of basketball career has been a lot around college basketball. So in high school, I was lucky enough to, at the time, play for a gentleman named Todd Dixon, who's over at Santiago Community Canyon College. And then also my club basketball coach, who as well as now Perry Webster at Fullerton Junior College. So I've actually always been around kind of college basketball minded coaches. And with that, through my development, those two played a significant role in me being able to play basketball on scholarship at UC San Diego under Eric Olin. And then just kind of over the time being able to build a Division II program, help it transition over to Division I. During my time, I was fortunate enough to start a lot of games, win a lot of games too as well, and just have an overall really positive experience. And then kind of just off the court too, playing a significant role in the transition or kind of campaign to go from Division II to Division I. So doing a lot of things with that. But just kind of with the overall kind of mindset is for me personally has just been how do we create or develop a college basketball player, and that's been kind of my forte for the last 4 or 5 years since I graduated. So currently right now my main role is with HG Intelligence, where I'm an associate college basketball analyst. So I'll do a lot of opponent scouting, post-game reports, player tracking analysis, things all around, very much centered around the idea of basketball analytics and how to help programs win more games and everything like that. So being able to work with these different coaches across the country, hear kind of their ideas and how they view their offenses, where they want to go on particularly both sides of the floor, especially, but at the same time, how do we support that with the analytics or opponent scanner and making their lives easier? So kind of taking that mindset, I'm able to, within kind of in currently with that job being remote, coach some of my guys and lead a player development charge on the front, particularly with this club basketball team called Six Man San Diego and a sports performance team called Activate Athletes. So I'll take a lot of what I do at the college level on both the athletic side and also ask questions on the sport performance side, and then hopefully bring it to our high school athletes and youth athletes and kind of build this path to college basketball in a very, I would say, scientific manner, but also understanding and helping guys get to where I want to get to is kind of the overall goal. So kind of long-winded a little bit there, but that's kind of my story so far.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like from your story and your experience, one of the cool things that you get to bring is you kind of bring in a lot of data, you bring in a lot of information, you kind of really kind of break down the game almost on a statistic and efficiency level to your guys in a way that I imagine they probably haven't really thought about the game before.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I played a lot of video games when I was growing up, so I was definitely one of those NBA Live, NBA 2K guys.
Yeah.
The idea of like changing stats and everything and seeing how it affects your offense, how it makes players better. But then the one thing you think about with kids, especially, is that kids respond to numbers. Also,
Mhm.
coaches respond to numbers, parents respond to numbers, and it kind of removes some of the personal aspect of it and keeps it more subjective and not as emotional too as well. So that's overall beneficial for a kid's development too.
Yeah, it's definitely good when you can tell something to a guy and you got numbers and actual data to bring it up so they don't think you're picking on them or just making stuff up or pulling it out of thin air or anything.
Yeah, it's really easy. Like, I mean, if Johnny's shooting a lot of threes, he's not making a lot. It's a lot easier to say, hey, like your last 10 threes, you missed 8 of them. It's a lot easier to say that rather than saying, like, hey, Johnny, I think you're shooting the ball really badly. Like, not the
Yeah,
great
yeah,
boy.
much different way that message, the second message is going to be taken over the first one.
Yeah, definitely.
So when you talk about analytics, so much out there, so many bits of information, so much data out there, and I wanted to ask you, Coach, about what analytics and what data in particular do you maybe put a strong emphasis on? Do you think are really good indicators in terms of a team's success, and how can a coach kind of use analytics and data and statistics and all that great stuff to really improve their coaching and game planning?
Yeah, so I think the first thing about analytics is actually just kind of viewing how you use analytics as a tool, right? I think
Hmm.
the first thing I tell a lot of coaches is analytics is meant to be a guide, not a god. So kind of what I mean by that, it's look for the stats you want to track that you think that leads to success on the court and track those. And then what is tracked and measured is probably things you can improve on right away. In terms of like what I individually pay attention for my team, I think I look a lot of like the possession battle kind of statistics. So particularly focusing on turnover rate and offensive rebounding rate. I kind of felt that if you were elite, especially if we're talking about college basketball, especially if you're elite at one of those two areas, you have a good chance to be really good. Teams who are top 25 are elite in both turnover rate and offensive rebounding rate. And a lot of that kind of comes down to simply how many times a game do we have an opportunity to score or just shoot the basketball in general. I think that's kind of not talked about a little bit much within the analytics world. But at the end of the day, you can't put up points on the board unless you're able to score or unless you're able to take care of the ball. If you can't take care of the ball, it's like, okay, in those possessions, can you get multiple shot attempts? So can you cross your glass effectively? So if you can't do one or two of those well, then it kind of becomes really hard to win because you just don't typically have enough chances to score. And then probably the second stat that I really put emphasis on, I think this is more in my personal preference, is going to be rim shots, right? I think being able to generate offense to the rim, just having that as a threat just opens up so many things for the offense and also leads to the second most efficient shot on the court, which is free throws. And if you're able to generate offense in the rim, get to the free throw pretty often, then defenses have to either adjust or you continue to score at the rim. However, like I do understand the argument of three versus two, but at the same time, when you're looking at the percentages and everything across the board, typically a lot of elite teams are really good at generating a lot of shots in the rim and then also on defensively taking away the rim and making teams being jump shooting shots. Especially we just watched it NBA champions Boston Celtics win that way, especially in the NBA Finals.
So to follow up on your first point, I'm always curious about coaches' thoughts on this, and that is talked about the importance that offensive rebounding can play, and I completely agree. If you're able to get extra possessions, if you're able to get more opportunities to shoot, definitely increasing your chances to be successful. In your opinion, coach, is there a secret or is there a magic that goes into offensive rebounding? Is it an idea of just will over skill? Is it something skill based that can be taught? What are your thoughts on the idea of kind of teaching offensive rebounding?
I think the biggest thing is just understanding what kind of players you have. Typically, like let's say you have a lot of guys you want to put pressure on the rim consistently, you're typically going to have guys who are just more aggressive going after the ball and kind of hounding on the glass. However, like let's say you have a team that like maybe you have a bunch of stretches or guys who want to shoot or very versatile, like not necessarily the most physicality team. I think that for itself, from a team standpoint, is just more personnel based on what you have. And then from a teaching standpoint, I think you kind of have to figure out within the spacing you're within offensively. Like obviously, if you're three out to win, you're gonna have potentially your two biggest guys if that's how you want to play next to the basket, which is gonna give you more chances for offensive rebounds versus try a little bit more of five out. But five out when you're trying to take away space out of the paint and guys are having a further distance to track down offensive rebounds, it can be hard to get a huge quantity. I'm not saying it's not impossible, but it would be significantly harder rather than, I guess,
Right.
kind of argument of can we start closest to the rim with our player starts when the shot goes up versus how far are we from the rim. So I think it's more depending on that spacing. I think that is a consideration for coaches. So I think without doing any significant numbers right here, I'd almost argue that probably when you see like a team that's maybe a ball screen continuity that has two bigs that are doing going in and out, going in and out, those teams typically have a chance for offense rebounds versus a typical five out offense that starts usually further away from rim, sometimes in 4 point spacing.
Yeah, logically, it just makes sense, right? The more spread out you are, the further away you are from rim, the less opportunities you're getting on the offensive glass. But if you got, like you said, guys down there, if you're running something, two bigs inside or high low or whatever it is that you're running, you're statistically speaking, you're going to have a guy close to the rim logically. So those chances are more likely to be there. I guess it just depends on what you're kind of prioritizing as a coach and what matters to the most to you offensively.
Yeah, I think like a really good example of that would be
Hmm.
SU's championship run a few years ago or 2 years ago, right? I think it was one of the first teams where you're watching them run some modern day like flex concept stuff, like post duck-ins. But like you had a lot of their bigs really close to the rim consistently, and they were really physical on the glass trying to beat you up and sending like 4 or 5, but those 4 or 5 guys are usually starting inside the arc based on their spacing.
Mm.
So that's a
Oh,
lot of like a very interesting dynamic it kind of had to deal with. So I think again,
yeah,
like
it's a good example. Yeah.
so like I said, it just depends on where you start offensively and where your players usually end up. Is kind of how you should probably think about your offensive rebound opportunities.
So, speaking of which, natural segue here to talking about implementing a five out offense. Coach, talk to us about what do you like about a five out system? What advantages do you see with it? What are things that you find preferable about a five out system in general over maybe running something else?
I think the first thing I want to think about five out system is actually making the defense spacing, making the defense guard the whole floor, right? When you're talking about 5 guys outside of 3 point line, you're sitting there and saying, hey, like not only do you have to cover the basket, but you have to get all the way out to me in the corner if I'm a threat to shoot it too as well. So making the defense have to guard a lot larger space on the court. I think the second one's going to be adaptability, right? Like you can flow into different concepts. So like say, hey, like you want to get someone on a post, you can some things I'll talk a little bit more about kind of actions you can go into, but you can get like a very basic ball or down screen, have Kai come up, throw into the post and do what you want to do. So there's definitely from an adaptability standpoint, different things you can go out to that can morph into different offenses if you want to. And I think just like when you think about the analytics side of it, typically when
Hmm.
you see teams who are more five out oriented, for me, like I said, I mentioned a very big emphasis on taking care of the ball. Five out teams have opportunity to take care of the ball a lot better because if you're thinking what's happening on the court, places where you might consider like high turnover areas or lots of hands, so like the paint, maybe on a block, well, in theory, you have all five out players attacking. When a player is attacking, there's less congestion inside the paint, so less hands and less opportunities for deflected passes, in theory, is how I kind of like to think about it. And then when you're thinking about the second one's going to be shot selection, I think five out gives you the best opportunity for your athletes to play in space and get downhill. And then when the defense reacts, you're able to get people who you designate as shooters around the perimeter open and catch and shoot opportunities, which layups are the most efficient shot in basketball, in my opinion. The second most efficient shot is going to be catch and shoot threes. Those are kind of my two main ideas. Very analytically approach, but at the end of the day, I'm not saying I don't want to take a certain kind of shot, but I do will say these are the shots I want to hunt offensively pretty consistently. So I think five out gives me the best chance to do that. And then kind of just thinking very more personnel based, like where your players need to end up on the court is what I like to think about, or how the pieces fit together from that. And I think five out gives you the most adaptability to change the pieces around.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, right? There's a lot of there's a lot of freedom involved, right? You've talked a lot. You mentioned about the idea of spacing, the amount of space that gets created. There's a lot of opportunities for sure, both on and off the ball, and I definitely want to kind of get into that. But before I kind of get into more of the specifics and nuances and little actions you can get within a five out, I kind of wanted to ask you about the process of kind of implementing it, right? Like I mentioned at the beginning, right? Implementing a five out, it seems pretty straightforward about how to set it up and how to work it. But of course, there's more to it because you're, of course, teaching decision making. You're teaching about the ways to run it correctly. So, Let me ask you, Coach, about what is the process you think for implementing a 5 out correctly? What sort of things can a coach do if they really want to go all in on a 5 out and really want it to be a high efficient system? What would you say is the process of putting it in, implementing it, and really getting it going the right way?
So I think the first thing you have to think about within a 5 out offense is kind of the idea of like tactical periodization. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of like game model, right? So you got to think about how you're going to flow into the 5 out, and then once you're in the 5.5 court, how do you move around in that 5 out? So I think the one thing I teach first thing and foremost is going to be transition offense. So how do we space the court when we're going from defense to offense after a miss or a make? So one of the things I like to talk about with guards and wings is like, hey, let's get out, pick a sideline and stay on that sideline. I'm a big advocate of making sure that our guards and wings aren't just crossing areas of floor and crossing over in the middle. Let's keep the middle wide open. And then depending on whoever you want your X5 to be or your trail guy, or if you have a rim runner, allowing that guy to rim run towards the rim and occupy the middle of the floor. But if you have a guy who's a stretch big, just keeping the floor wide open and keeping the paint wide open, kind of following the idea of making the defense guard the entirety of the court. And so then again, like if you have your really good players who can get downhill, it gives them the space in transition to figure out those lanes early offense. And then some things like while I do like some of the fancy stuff you can run out of 5 out action, if we can get downhill after one pass outlet, guy gets going downhill and go finish at the rim with our spacing, that's great offense in itself. Don't have to call anything. It's yeah. So just establishing our spacing from transition to half court. And I think within our half court offense, with our 5 out or 50 offense, I kind of give them 3 rules to kind of play out our frameworks. So the first one, we make a slot to corner pass, we'll go cut through. So cut through the opposite corner. If we make a slot to trail or say our big cut all the way through and we go slot to slot, which is screen down. And then our X4, X5 or trail guy can rise up and we can do little things out of action, like drag screen, transition, or in a half court, which run 3-man action with our X4. Best playmaker really at the top of the key, high post or low post. And is being able to give those guys more of a black and white and create the one thing I like to do for my guys is help them have like expectations in the court or expect what to happen. And keeping things black and white helps guys hold accountable peer to peer, and then also for me to hold them accountable as well. But I know that's kind of long-winded, but very kind of sum it up, it's teach the transition part first. So teach how you want to space and how you keep the middle wide open. And then within the half court, just give them, if you just don't want to call anything, just give them the three rules or 3 principles you want to play out of, and then have them kind of just make the adjustments from there.
What would you say, Coach? And I think that's great. I really like that idea, especially about transition, right? Uh, I'm the same way. I believe of like, I may have an offense that I like to run, but shoot, if we can get out in transition, we can go first and make that our opportunity to strike. Let's go there first. So I love that you mentioned that. So you talked about those 3 keys. What goes into drilling those or practicing those? What's the process of kind of getting your guys to really understand what those mean in a game situation? How does that get kind of practiced and drilled?
Yeah, so the first thing I do a lot is I talk a lot about creating an advantage. So a lot of things I do for creating an advantage or understanding how to, let's say 1-on-1 was how do we beat a closeout? How do we beat someone in transition, maybe going 100 miles per hour? How do we beat someone on a post up? And then one thing we'll do is 1-on-1 plus a coach, right? Where we'll add, if you can't score on the closeout, let's hit the coach. If it's at the top of the key, you can come off for a DHO, or maybe it's a ball screen action. And then we kind of teach a lot of that 1-on-1 setting in terms of just teaching guys how to utilize potentially a screen with the coach and create advantage away from the defender. If we want to teach them how to attack at our closeouts, so we'll do a lot of that individually. We'll spend probably a lot of the offseason working on just creating an advantage and giving ourselves the opportunity to make decisions. And then we come to the decision making process or teaching how to make decisions. I'm actually a very big advocate of doing a lot of FIBA 3-on-3.
Mm.
So
No,
very
that's
much
great. Yeah.
let's go through all the actions, let's have a ton of pace and help guys understand like what we're looking for. And then I'm very heavy on constraint led approaches. So in order to teach shot selections within a 3-on-3, I might change the point scoring system to what shots I want to see. So typically my go-tos are catch and shoot threes are worth 5 points and layups are worth 5 points. Everything else is worth whatever number value, or if I'm feeling like I want to really emphasize the day and make everything else worth 1. But just helping people understand like what shots are looking for within the frame of the game to help them win that particular drill. And then include like the FIBA 3-on-3 or 3-on-3 actions, all of that. We'll do a lot of the advanced drills. So 4-on-3 shooting. I'll have some constraints on 4-on-3 shooting where maybe we only have our slot guys are able to move off the ball, but our corner guys have to stay still and maintain the spacing in the half court. So helping guys understand how to utilize their gravity and who they can drive towards to help them win there. And I think just overall, I think 5-on-5 just kind of comes down to constraint-led approaches or coming up with unique games. I think one thing I've been working on a lot lately, I've been thinking a lot is I had a lot of guys who want to play really fast, but helping them understand how we can score fast and efficiently in the full court. One of the things I picked up from some of the folks at Talking Guys or Dan Krikorian was this game called 100,
Okay.
where every time you score, whatever time is left on the shot clock, that's how many points you get. So, for example, let's say you get a steal, a long rebound, and then a steal, and you're able to score in the first 5 seconds of possession. You're going to add 30 points to your point total, and you're playing to a particular total. So helping understand, like, hey, like, if we can create these unique situations where we create these number of opportunities in transition, this is what we can reward. And those are the kind of shots, if I'm thinking as a coach, like, what are the most efficient offenses, and the whole hot buzzword of it's a lot more efficient when you play faster. It's about more hunting efficient shots, helping them understand it. However, within that game, it still teaches the idea if we can't get anything early, like, well, we get into our action, we can still potentially get anywhere from 15 to 25 points, depending on how fast we can get into what we want to do and create the advantage and give ourselves a decision. So I think like that's one of the drills we'll do, but I'll spend a lot of time thinking about like what actions on the court do we want to see or what do we need to work on, and spend a lot and figure out different sided games to really simulate that particular moment on the court. And that's how I
What's
go
really,
50.
what I was going to say, what's really cool about one of the parts of your answer is I've talked to quite a few coaches recently who've emphasized something you did about having point systems to things in practices, right? That competitive element of having winners and losers, but assigning point values to certain actions, or certain points mean certain things. And I think that that's kind of a really fun and like competitive way to really kind of drill like concepts that you're looking to get into by assigning the things that are kind of most important for the offense to work correctly by putting a higher point value on certain things than others. And definitely not only kind of emphasize that to your guys about here are the most efficient looks or here are the best ways that we can look to score, but also building something competitive and meaningful where, like I said, there is that like winner or loser because you either got to this certain point total or you didn't. I just think that that's really cool that that's something I'm hearing more and more being discussed about with coaches.
I think too, it's also teaching guys how to win, right? I think when you introduce like a straight leds approach or just changing the point system, you're talking about like, hey, like what's the most efficient route for us winning? And helping players get into that mindset pretty consistently. When you think about, let's say, like we're doing all these games during the summer and we get to like playoff time in February for a lot of high schools, and it's like, hey, we need to make a slight tweak because this gives us a better chance of winning. That communication to your players is a lot easier because, well, you spent your entire year practicing what's the most efficient way for us to win this particular game. So players are constantly thinking about like what strategy we need to use based on the rules of the game. How do we win there? So that's kind of, I think that's more of a philosophical approach, but that's just kind of how I'm thinking about it, and just making that communication a lot easier when you do need to make an adjustment or you're still asking these players to look for something particularly on the court.
And now you mentioned this in part in your answer, but I did want to ask you more directly on this so that anybody listening can definitely hear a kind of direct answer. We know in a 5-out situation, coach, that there's going to be those times when players need to take advantage of a one-on-one matchup, whether it's off the dribble or whether it's in a post up. So when you're working with guys about winning a matchup one on one, what are the keys to winning a one on one matchup out in the wing, as well as winning a one on one post up matchup? What are the things you work on with your guys to make sure they can attack and take advantage of those opportunities when the advantage is going to be there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we talk about is really just play to your strengths, right? I think if you're able to pull a big out to the perimeter and you're a guy who likes to get downhill, make sure you're doing those things and getting to those opportunities and seeking for opportunities on that on the court. So typically, like, right, if we know a team, hopefully this is a situation we're able to scout and we know how a team is going to guard us and create how we know we're going to create a mismatch or potentially an advantage off a particular action, being able to talk about before and actually really simulating those ideas during practice, right? So one thing we'll talk about, let's say, hey, we're going against a switching defense and everything like that. one of the drills I'll implement is the thing called play it down, where we'll go within a sequence like 4-on-4, shooter and defender step off, 3-on-3, 2-on-2, 1-on-1. That's kind of SparkNotes version of it, but just teaching these players how to attack a switch or everything like that throughout the possession and throughout drill, and going from all the way from 4-on-4 all the way down to 2-on-2. And then typically when you get to the 1-on-1 action, depending on how things have worked out, let's say you're going against a switching defense, you might have a situation where you have a big on guard based on how the drill played out on who was contesting, who was shooting. So then putting players in that opportunity to go against a big, and one thing I'll do is say, hey, when we get to that 1-on-1 portion, I'll go, hey, pick a spot on the court where you want to maybe diagnose this matchup. So typically in that 1-on-1 start, if we get our 6'4" or 6'6" big against our 5'10" guard, you can almost get that they're gonna think I want to get down to the post, which indirectly tells them like, hey, when I get this
Mhm.
matchup in game, here's what we want to look for. So teaching those elements and like decision making there, and then creating like unique drills like that where you put them in the moments too as well in practice.
No, I love that a lot. Appreciate you going in a little bit more to that. Decision making so important in running in a five out. You talked about all the options and all of the looks that you can get into and players can get into in it, which is one of the beauties of a five out system. It's very open ended. A lot of decision making, a lot of player led decision making. But of course, that's a process for players to make the right reads, to make the right decisions, and know how to, as we talked about, kind of take advantage of those mismatches, or work in a way to get a mismatch in a five out system. So what goes into kind of improving a player's decision making? What are some things that maybe a coach can do if they're in a five out system that can help their guys or girls make the right reads and make the right decisions to create those advantages in a five out?
So I think the biggest thing you can do is not necessarily play 5-on-5, play more 3-on-3, and make players have to fit different roles within that 3-on-3 setting. So I think when you take two players off the court, that means that you're giving potentially a players 40% more opportunity to do what they want to do and have the ability to make a decision. And then for us, like if you want to train after the decision, let's design a drill that trains after the decision. So for example, it's if I want to train a kid, like if he's driving baseline, let's give a kid the ability to maybe start shoulder to shoulder with his defender and make him attack left baseline and make a decision on the help side, and just force him to be in those after decision moments right away. I think that's just one unique way you can do it. I think the second one is just, again, I think this is more of a coaching mindset, just empowering players, right? Like understanding like what their strengths are and telling them like, hey, these are what your strengths are. Let's hear how you can look for them and coach them up that way with the decision making and what they want to do. So let's say you have a guy who's like a 40% three-point shooter, but you get scared of him putting the ball on the floor. It's okay, like, hey, like here's how you utilize your strengths. Here's where you get yourself in trouble. So let's focus on doing on the strengths, and we can work on adequately improving your weaknesses, but at the same time, we want you to focus on doing strengths. So let's have you involved in this action when we're five out. Maybe you're the one coming off the screens, or maybe we have you come to his basket to create the space for guys who are maybe potentially a little more creative off the dribble to get to the rim. So really going through and talking player by player about not necessarily for my space right now within the youth, it's talking about player development standpoint of like what your strengths are and here's how the defenses are going to guard you. And then here's how we can make you into a better player based on that. But if we're talking in the college setting, it's like, hey, like here's how you distort the defense, here's how they're going to guard you, and here's how that particular role plays a fit into our offense, and helping them understand that. So it's very much like for me, I'm very big on talking to players 101 about how they can utilize their strengths and what their role is within my scheme. But typically when I'm in the youth development space, it's kind of like hopefully everyone can pass, shoot, dribble, and
Mhm.
hopefully class grass too. But again, that's dependent on whatever your scheme is and what kind of, I think, mental player you have too as well.
Well, I feel like that kind of goes hand in hand if you're having those one-on-one conversations with, like we talked about earlier, about like analytics and data. You could, I'm sure, and you can talk about this too, that you can bring in, stuff that you've charted, stuff that you've statted, data that you have of players, and kind of go through them and talk about, where their advantages are, what they should be looking to do, how they can, be the most effective in this offense from a team standpoint, individual standpoint. I'm sure those conversations are probably happening one-on-one with guys.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, last year at Cathedral Catholic, me and one of my graduate, or I say graduate assistants, but student managers, one of my team managers, we actually developed this full scale like analytics program to help kids, like a lot of player tracking, and help people understand what their best shots were. So we tracked everything, like what was your percentage at the rim, what was your percentage in the mid range or non-rim twos, what I like to call them, or and then percentage on 3-point jumpers, and then based on those shot attempts, I'm very big on when I think analytics. My first mind goes to frequency and behavior. So what led to those efficiencies? So I'll focus a lot on that, and we were able to create this kind of unique system and player by player tracking that we're able to do in game and be able to tell people in live like, hey, Coach Graham Bowsley, like here's what's going on and being able to do what we need to do there. So I think, and from a player development standpoint, it's, well, hey, man, when you're going to your left and you pull up for a mid-range jumper, you're giving us less than 1 point per possession on that shot. Can we turn that into a left-hand layup where you're shooting 59% at the rim? So being able to have those kind of conversations right away is something I value a lot because it helps me build that trust with the player and then say, hey, like, if you have a player who's in the mid range and it's like everything like that, he's a sniper in the mid range, it's a lot easier to have those conversations and encourage him to do it more if he's shooting like 55% and everything like that. And they see the number plus your encouragement, or let's say, hey, you want them to not do that particular behavior on the court because it leads to X, Y, and Z. And they have all of that plus the film, plus the data, plus hopefully your trusted advisor in their life too as well. They're going to want to listen to you more because you're caring about their overall development.
No, that yeah, no, I love that. I was actually writing this stuff down, Coach. This is great. No, and that, point that you mentioned at the end, I think is could sometimes be overlooked that um and I've had a couple conversations like this in my coaching career that I've been really grateful for about where you talk to players about data, you talk to players about analytics and stuff, and you can see that they're almost like shocked in a way that like you've been paying that much attention or you care that much to pay attention about these sort of things, and it really does make a difference. It's so interesting that there's so many different answers to things that create like a positive culture and positive relationships of players, but something that may even be a little bit overlooked is having those conversations with guys or girls and being able to show all of this data or this information that you have about them and talk it through with them and the conclusions that you've made from it and where you can go from them, I think shows a level of care that players really do appreciate and really appreciate that that level of time is being taken with them. And is just a great way to build a lot of trust with a player when they know that you're putting that much time and investment for them to get better.
Yeah, I think the overall thing for me is just creating that feeling like we're all in this together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like as you collect more stats and data and like I think what is measured can be improved. Being able to do that over time and then figuring out like when you're collecting the data, you're actually just learning way more about your players and their particular behaviors on the court because you're looking for things in particular, all of that. And then it's easy to have those conversations and you just know internally, like you're just again, like this is where you learn like a player who is passive versus aggressive, and it's easy to have those conversations. And yeah, so I don't know. I think, like I said, I think you hit it right on top of the head. Creating the idea that we're all in this together just leads to a more positive culture and a culture of accountability, love, all that. Just makes it way more fun to be there.
You're working with guys, like I said, the collegiate level, you're working with guys of a high level of skill. One of the things I'm curious about, because you're in this world a lot more than me, is players' understanding of how to work off ball in an offensive system. I hear a lot of conversation about players' ability to make an offensive work when they don't have the ball, and maintaining correct spacing, which obviously a 5 out naturally lends itself to, or making the right reads, or setting good screens and things like that. So like I said, because you're a little bit more connected with that world and players at that level, how would you kind of assess what players' skill set is off ball? And is there a lot of work that you need to do, or a lot of work that you need to kind of go over with your guys to kind of get them up to speed on how to be an effective offensive player off the ball? Or do players kind of come to you already with that skill set kind of polished?
I usually have to teach with my setting like what their most effective skills are off the ball, especially. I think for me, it goes back to kind of earlier conversation about what are you really good at on the court. So, for example, right, if I have a guy who is shooting 65% at the rim, and then let's say he might not be the best spot up 3-point shooter, it's okay, let's put you in situations where you're potentially the 4 or 5 cutter, or we have you on those drive reacts and helping you teach It'd be more focused emphasis on you cutting to the rim and then catch and shoot being second. And then versus if I have a lights out spot up shooter, it's want you to hunt for catch and shoot threes first. But if you do see an open cut to the rim, cut there. But I think as you get higher up, right, that conversation becomes easier. But when you're talking about the lower levels and like youth, eighth grade, even early high school, kind of just teaching the little concepts like very basic for cutting in general. It's when we can talk about more about it, but I usually tell guys like, hey, as soon as if you see your defense, you see the back of your head, defender's head, cut. If your defender's playing in front of you with his back towards basketball, cut. And those are the two decisions that we talk about pretty consistently. And we'll talk about those two decision makings within like the screening actions and all of that. And then once we define that within the 3-on-3 actions, we can kind of see what players typically go through, especially in those when they're having the ball more frequently and they're looking to score, then more from the 5-on-5 to putting them in that same situation within our 5-on-5 setting to where they can look to expose that and look for those opportunities too as well. So I think it really kind of comes down to, for me, I'm always going to look at the film, collect the data, right? And then make my decisions from there. And then use the eye test to help people understand how they can be more effective in the court. But I think to kind of sum it up, it comes down to what are you really good at? What are you really good at? Let's make sure you do that first, and then we can work on everything else afterwards.
Even something, and you know this, but I think this is kind of a good point of emphasis for coaches who may be listening, even something as simple or seemingly as simple as cutting without the ball. I've seen it a lot with the girls that I work with where there's a big difference between, cutting with intention, cutting with actual meaning and purpose versus cutting and going through the motions. And I think that at least I know at the high school level, and I'll let you speak to your experience. One of the things that I had to be really careful about when putting in systems with off ball movement and players that have responsibilities about the ball is making sure that the things that they're doing are intentional and purposeful and are really meaningful versus just kind of going through the motions. Oh, I got to go set the screen, or I got to go cut the and make this cut. And I know from experience, and I'm sure you do as well, coach, that if those movements and those things without the ball are not being done with any level of care or seriousness, the defense is not going to give them any consideration. And they're going to know that, oh, yeah, maybe he's cutting, but he's just cutting just to move. And there's nothing really behind that. And I think it's really important to make sure that all those movements are done with that level of seriousness and energy and focus so that the defense has to respect it.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things I talk about a lot with my players is kind of giving them a mindset individually on the court. So
Hmm.
one of the things we talk about too is catch the ball ready to shoot, or you're cutting and you have to be ready to shoot if someone passes you the ball. Is one of the things I talk about a lot when you talk about like dribble to penetrate. So we're dribbling to penetrate, and either we're gonna shoot it, or if we're gonna pass, we're trying to pass to create. And the reason why like I say that, like having those three things right there, it's making sure we get that into all of our players' heads, and then that makes every cut or every screen or every action that much more meaningful because it gives them the idea prospectively that okay, maybe if I set this down screen and I slip to the rim, I can almost expect the ball to come to me if I'm wide open. So I have to be ready to catch. So it gives them a little more intentionality on what they're doing on the court. And just for me personally, like when I'm thinking about individual coaching within the 5-on-5 outside of X and O's, I'm really just coaching those three things pretty consistently and helping people and like making it seem like no lazy action in what we're doing. Like there's a meaning behind every single action on offense over and over and over, and just letting guys rep that with that kind of mindset within the games we're doing.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Everything with a purpose. I think that's really awesome. What do you kind of see opponents kind of do against a 5 out? When are you seeing a lot of zone matchup, zone man? What are the different kind of things that you see defenses kind of put up against a 5 out, and what kind of adjustments and tweaks do you make? Is it more based on the personnel that you're playing against, the defensive system you're playing against? Talk us through kind of what you're seeing other teams kind of do defensively against you and how you kind of act and counter that.
So yeah, I think the biggest thing for me when I think about opponent game planning is what is the defense going to do to take away the rim from me? I
Hmm.
think the biggest thing within offense, it's if you can't generate anything at the rim, it becomes a lot easier for you to be guarded around the perimeter because teams can deny you, right? I think one of the things that I end up running into if we're able to generate a lot of rim pressure, it's defenses want to stay out of rotation pretty consistently, so they'll go to switching. So a lot of things that we'll talk about switching within our 5 outs screen, it's setting, it's when we set our off ball screens, all of that. We want to set them high and wide so we give ourselves room to slip to the basket. So that's what we'll go against switching. That's typically what I get. For example, like I might have the off chance where a coach might not respect one of my players on court shooting ability. We'll pretty much notice that right away. Hopefully it's a pre-scouting thing. We'll utilize that guy in a lot of DHOs or off ball screening, or we'll ask him to come set the ball screen and like help create that one-on-one advantage. And hopefully if we're doing a good job in the off season, going one-on-one with your defender with a free ball screen with no help side defender on that ball screen becomes a lot easier to attack and put our best guys hopefully in the space. So I think it really comes down to we'll look at what the defense is doing, how they're guarding ball screens, how they're guarding off ball stuff, and then we'll kind of adjust from there. And then in game, I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of smart basketball players, so they probably make me look a
That's
lot
good.
better,
Yeah,
and
that's
all
good to have.
that. But I think a lot of it just kind of comes down to what is the defense doing to take away the paint? Are they not taking the paint at full scale, denying how do we get downhill right away? And we have our certain set of packages, or sometimes it's just, hey, how do we not have to play half court offense if it's going into matchup zone? Obviously, we have our 5 out offense against the zone offense, but at the same time, ideally, like I said, I think to start the podcast, if I don't have to run any offense and we can get out
Just
high and
going.
wide, go score, I'm cool. Like, there's nothing really with that.
Yeah, no, I know. I 100% agree, right? You don't want to necessarily feel fixated that if you don't need to play in a half court and you got the guys, the girls that can run out in transition and get buckets, maybe you have a great offensive system in the half court that that works and know is going to be effective, but make it easier on yourself. If you know you can get buckets out in transition, you can make the game, up and down, make it a track meet, as I like to say. Like, yeah, don't try and make it any more difficult on yourself, right? Just go out there and win that way and get the points that way if you can.
Yeah, definitely. I think if we do have to run half court offense in that setting against the game plan, like I said, we'll always try to focus on getting the rim. And then the second thing I talk to the players is going to be how do we distort the defense, or distort the defense in particular, how they guard their guys. So if we know going into the game that we have a lights out shooter, our shooter's going to get denied, you'll see me for sure run some action where I have probably one of my best drivers getting downhill to their strong hand with that shooter in the corner, knowing that they're not going to help off strong side. So just being very unique and helping guys understand how their skill in the court distorts the space and how that affects all the off ball action. And I think that's something key from a player development standpoint. I think it's very much under talked about, but that can that can probably be for a different conversation for another day. But I think that's a very key thing if you really want your 5 out offense to really flourish, is understanding and helping players understand how they distort the space on the court.
And as you mentioned before, that idea of teaching the game of basketball, you said you've been very fortunate to have guys who have a high basketball IQ. I think that the more, especially in a 5 out system, right, the more that your players understand how to create those mismatches, how to, as you mentioned, I love that word distort that you used, right? The more of an understanding that your guys have of the game of basketball itself, the more that they can naturally see where those opportunities are, the more they can kind of see where they can break down a defense. And the more it's player led, where you can just maybe direct a few things, call out a few things, but you can trust that your guys can see what's happening on the court and make decisions from there. And when that happens, I think you're in really good shape as a coach and as a team.
Yeah, definitely. I think as as your players just become way more aware of what they can and cannot do on the court, I just think
Mm-hmm.
it's from a culture standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, it just gets easier and easier and easier. I think being in those, I think that's where, when you think about the argument about if we play too many games or not, or all the classic AAU stuff, I think the argument should be more centered on, are we practicing enough and being able to put people in focus situations and make the players have to react and actually develop that basketball IQ that we know at the end of the day when they're battling in game, they're not gonna be able to make those proper adjustments, not with adrenaline and everything like that. That's not gonna be a teaching moment there, especially for players.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you, coach. Uh, You brought something up that I'd love to talk about with coaches who work with skilled players, and of course, in a 5-out system, coach, you're going to need you need guys, you need girls who are going to be able to shoot. You need them being ready, shot ready, being able to just knock down shots, and the difference that exists between a good shooter and a great shooter. It's maybe a small difference, but it makes a huge difference in terms of things that could happen on the scoreboard. So you're working with guys, and what are some tips or what's some advice that you would give for coaches to work with their shooters so that they can get their shot off maybe a little bit quicker, they're a little bit more shot ready, they're making more shots? What are some tips and advice you would give to a coach to kind of get their guys or girls just that much better at shooting?
So I think the first thing I always tell coaches or players when they come to me asking how do I get improve my shooting is going to be, well, what's your best stance when you're shooting a basketball? So typically, right, if you go to the OC fair or if you go to the OC fair, you go
Mhm.
to or you're shooting like a random basketball shot like an arcade, you're going to step into that shot a particular way every single time that you're most comfortable. So one thing I'll talk about too, and I'll use the analogy, you don't ever see baseball players changing their stance every single time they go to swing unless they're a switch hitter. But even then, it's typically they will go back to their strong hand or what stance they feel like will give them the best chance to get a hit. So we'll take that kind of idea and apply it to our players. So helping our players figure out what their best stance is on their shot. How do we get to that balance set? Obviously, if you're fortunate enough to have a player who's equally good coming off like a 1-2 step, a hop, can go to his left, go to his right, that's probably going to be an elite level player. But typically, when you have like the average high school kid, it's more about how do we get them to their best stance. And I think secondly, it's going to be let's have more off ball movement shooting. I think a lot of times, like I'm a very firm believer, if you want to get spot shooting up and all of that, you can go on your own or you can get your friend or buddy and just do some spot shooting. But if I'm a coach or a trainer, I want to put you through all the different kinds of situations within a basketball game where you might have to get your feet set, ready to shoot. And I'm looking at how do you get your feet on balance? Are you going up? Do you get your feet under you? Are you always leaning away? All of that. You don't ever really figure that out unless you're practicing off ball movement shooting consistently. I'm not necessarily talking about coming off a pin down or a flare, just a simple, hey, let's slide to the corner or come up on a rise, 1-2 shot, and is working on those in sequence. So one of the drills I'll do with probably one of my best guys, it's I'll give him 3 or 4. Actually, I did 7 shots the other day, but 7 different shots in the court within one drill rep. And I'll say, hey, before we go on, we need to make 20 total shots across these, and we'll just continue to go through it. And that way, he's constantly thinking about like, how do I get to that next best shot? How do I get my feet under me? How do I get set? And just helping them reinforce it. And again, if I don't have a lot of time, I'm just in season, I know personally, like I need to be able to knock down this particular three, which is work on that three all the time. If I'm only shooting slide to the corner threes, we work on shooting slide to the corner threes during season over and over and over and rep those. So very much let's do more on the move shooting, in my opinion. And then first one, if depending on how much time you have with the player or where you are and your coaching, just helping players really want to just get to the best stance when they're shooting.
I don't know. I like that a lot. I mean, it's the analogy used for baseball is right, right? That idea like baseball players don't change their stance at all. And it's really transferable, I think, to a basketball player. That idea of like, getting in their stance and repetition and the way that they get reps and the way that they work off of that, right? There's a lot to be said about that. I think that's really cool. I really like that analogy for baseball. I'm probably gonna steal that because I do have some players who are softball players. So hope you don't mind if I steal that from you, coach.
Of course. I'll say I stole it from someone else too, so it's all
That's
good.
that's what we all do as coaches, right? We steal stuff from everyone. I find that when I have players come in, when we're working on offense, that I'm doing a lot of work teaching screening and setting screens properly, the purpose of screens, how to make sure that you're using the screen to your advantage. And I was curious if you find yourself also having to work on making sure that screens are set effectively, and what, in your opinion, goes into setting a good screen and one that actually has a purpose and creates an offensive advantage.
Yeah, so I do find myself teaching a lot about screening. I think one thing I really focus on is going to be the angle of our screen or where are we setting our own teammate to. So I'll use like the ball screen example, right? If I know a team is going heavy under, we might work on all week. Like if I'm the screener, when I go to set the screen on that player they're going under, can I get my butt facing the paint and get that guy going downhill? So we'll spend a lot of time screening there. One thing I spend a lot of time too as well, it's talking about where are we setting our screens on the court.
Mhm.
So one thing, like I'll run a lot of floppy action just to switch out my corner and have my shooters come off. And I'll talk about I want to set these high and wide and be able to slip. Well, if I'm setting these screens on the block, I'm not going to have a lot of room to slip to the basket and give myself space to make a decision. So I'll talk a lot about where we're setting the screens on the court. If we know that a team wants to pressure the ball super high, it's like, okay, let's see if we can get a ball screen near half court. And this is why, so we can put this player in the space. So I think I find myself teaching a lot more of when I'm setting a screen, why am I setting a screen for that player? Like, where am I trying to send that player in relative? So I'll find myself teaching a lot of that. And then I think just overall, I think also teach using the screen too as well as a key part of it because it's hard to be a really good screener if your teammate doesn't know how to use it, right? So like what I mean by that, coming off too early, trying to
Mhm.
make me set a moving screen a little bit, or just don't even give me a chance to set a good screen for you. So there's a lot of that back and forth, all of that. And then truthfully, I think when we're doing these one-on-one plus one drills and they feel me setting some screens, and I was fortunate enough to be part of those old school camps where I worked on screening for an hour every single day when I was younger, being able
Yeah,
to
did
have
you?
like some of those nuances that I've had to set maybe a slightly illegal screen that might not look like an illegal screen. Or I think one very old school trick that like one of my players really hates to start doing in game. It's the classic, well, how do our arms get wrapped up in the screen? So kind of teaching those guys like those nuances of that and making more screening like more of a fun skill to learn too as well.
Well, I mean, it's a good thing because like those type of screens, right, are going to be sent against them, and they're not going to get called. So I feel like it's only fair for them to know how to do it because hey, if they're going to do it against you, you might as well know how to do it to use it to your advantage as well.
Yeah, I think too is like if you want to increase the kids' physicality, teach them how to screen. I think that is the first and foremost, and they get used to players hitting them on the court. If you get as soon as they get used to it and they know what that pain or whatever they want to experience feels like, they'll probably get more accustomed to doing it. I think I'm not a big fan on like doing very heavy one-on-one block out drills and all of that, but I will say being able to teach a kid how to set an effective screen and make sure they make contact goes a long way to helping a kid become more aggressive.
So, follow-up question. I was going to ask this to you anyway because I had it written down. This perfect segue. You're doing a great job giving me these segues. When you're teaching and working with guys about finishing at the rim. Got to attack. You got to make sure that you're ready to attack at the rim. But of course, we're not just looking to drive at the rim and throw something wild up there. We want to finish strong at the rim and attack the rim correctly and intelligently. When you're working with guys about finishing at the rim, what are some tips and advice that you give for them about how to either finish all the way, draw a good foul, or get some net positive out of their attack?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I usually work on is going to be mentality. I think the first thing when you have a kid attacking the rim, you have to get it out of their mind that they might get their shot blocked. When you think about like some of the best shot blockers in the country, very rarely, I think, I don't know like exact stats, but typically I'll see players who have 100 shots, they only block about five or six, and those are considered elite shot blockers. I have 100 shot, which like if I'm going to the basket and that's in a team offense, so in theory, it's like unless like I'm going up wildly and crazy or I have a high frequency, odds are more times than not, the defense is probably going to try to alter my shot rather than block it. So helping players understand that mentality of like if I get blocked at the rim, it's more of an amazing play by the defense rather than something I messed up on. So they're going up strong. And then the second one I'm a very firm believer in you make layups with your eyes. So one thing I'll talk about just in general, it's get your eyes up on the rim or put your chin on the rim before you jump. So again, one, so you see where the defense is, and then you give yourself the ability to say, hey, like I know I'm looking at the rim, not just with my eyes, but my chin is saying
Mhm.
I'm looking up at the rim. And that becomes easier during film. And if I see on film your chin is not on the rim when you're going up, I can almost best guess that you might not know where the rim is at. So helping players understand that analogy too. And then three is just I'm a big fan of just play off two. Like give yourself the opportunity to stop. I think when you're jumping off one, unless you're a high level athlete, and I think again, like if you're a high major athlete and you can jump off one and play out the building, yeah, go for it. But like very rarely do you see a kid that's like that. And it's almost one of those things where you jumping off one might work in your area, but like as soon as you meet the kids who are similar athleticism and there's not much difference, it becomes a lot harder to finish. So teaching kids how to play off too and just be patient around the rim is probably the third point I really focus on when I talk about just playing around the rim in general.
That was great. I like that idea of, like it's actually kind of interesting. I was thinking about, you could even look at film with a guy and see them attacking the rim and even ask him that question, like, do you even know where the rim is right now? Like where it is, like looking at the move that you're making or where it is that you're positioned. Do you have any idea exactly where it is that you're at or how you're going to finish here? And I think film is such a really good thing for that because I think guys and girls can look and think, hey, coach, I drove, X amount of times the rim. I was trying to finish at the basket, but then you can actually literally break it down frame by frame about what they were doing, where their eyes were at, where their chin was at, like you mentioned, where's everything in terms of their body and angle. And you could say like, yeah, maybe you were trying to attack it, but everything in your body language, the way that you were presenting yourself, gave yourself no chance of actually being successful. And sometimes that could be really helpful to kind of click that there's a difference between driving the basket and actually like putting yourself in a position to finish at the basket.
Yeah, I think also too is when you're looking at the rim. So how I learned how to throw no look passes when I was younger is that when you're looking at the rim, you actually can see everywhere on the court. And it's like when you're going off the dribble and you stop and look at the rim, it might even be a fake pump fake too, but also gives you a chance to examine the whole court. And I was younger. I was fortunate enough to, I was playing at a local 24-hour fitness. I met someone who taught me that. And I
Oh
remember
yeah.
sitting there and being like, oh yeah, like that's how I can see everything on the court. And I can evaluate. I can figure out like, oh, if I set this flare screen, here's where the space on the court is. Or it's if I need to throw a no leg pass, I need to draw the defense to me. I can just look at the rim and pull it and I can throw it. And I know where to throw it based on that. And I think interesting enough, wherever you stand on the court and you look at the rim, you can see pretty much everything except what's behind you for the most part. So it's a very interesting concept that as I was younger, obviously, I don't know. I don't know if that's like a nuanced thing or kind of a light bulb thing, but I think that's also a positive why you want people attacking the rim and looking at the rim, especially if you're trying to develop really good passers.
Yeah, it's a point of emphasis for me. I talk about my girls all the time. They will tell you about even just when you catch the ball, like, can you see the rim? Are you looking at the rim? Are you ready? Whether to shoot, whether to attack, can you see the whole floor? Can you see where everything is? And it's again, it's one of those points where I think as coaches sometimes we maybe make these assumptions that our players can do some of these things. They're looking at some of these things, but it doesn't even hurt to tell it. Even if they know it, it doesn't hurt to tell them that because it shows even as a coach that it's important to you. So your players know, okay, I know this matters that, where my eyes are at and where I'm looking at the rim and where my body position is. So even if that's something I already was going to do, I know that my coach also mentioned it and emphasized it. So even more of a reason to make sure that I keep doing it.
Yeah, 100%. I think I'm a very big advocate. Just the kind of analogy I use is you wouldn't drive a car and not look at the road, right? It's kind of what I usually tell my players for the most
Yeah,
part.
some of the drivers I see on the road, coach, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they do need to hear that lesson too about
Ex-
that, looking at the road. No, that's funny. Awesome,
Exactly.
coach. This is great. This flew by, and I want to make sure I ask these couple questions here before we wrap up that I ask every guest. Starting with this first one, which is thinking back on your coaching career. What is a moment from your coaching career that you think by sharing it, our listeners would be able to learn from?
Yeah, I think the moment that I want to think about too is actually the stuff off the court as a coach, right? I think as a player, you always think about your coach being this great mentor and doing all this thing for you, everything when you're younger. But then when you get into that coaching role, particularly, you start to realize your level of influence on these players and how they go to you for not necessarily just basketball things and all that. So I think for me, one of the things I've learned a lot is to just figure out how to learn and learn more about your players and also figure out how to laugh more with them too as well and develop that relationship because it just makes everything 10 times easier. I think one of the things that when I talk about like a lot of my players, it's 2K. Like I'm very advocate. I still play 2K pretty consistent, do all of that. And we'll talk about that game very randomly, very casually. We'll talk about who beat who and all of that, have the laughs here. One of the things we'll talk about, like one of the comments I'll usually make during a training session is like you wouldn't make that shot in 2K either. So like I don't know why you're shooting it. Like just different things like that, being able to relate with them off the court. And then I don't know. It's really interesting to have a conversation. You can really understand how a kid sees the sports in general just by talking to them off the court and how they're everything around them kind of operates a little bit more. And I don't know. And then lastly, I think within my own basketball career, I'm still a very big advocate this as a player. Like you really don't remember like you remember playing the games, but you really just kind of remember like the feelings after the game, before the game, how you were feeling, maybe a particular moment during the game, but it's not necessarily playing the game itself is what you remember. And so I typically have more of an affinity to pay attention to those little moments off the court more so than honestly on the court. So I think kind of my coaching moment, it's over time giving yourself and putting yourself in the situation to learn and laugh more with your players is probably the best thing I can do. So
That's great. I love that. I love the 2K one that you mentioned. I like doing that too, kind of teasing them a little bit about that and everything. That's awesome. That's really cool. To wrap up, Coach, I give every guest kind of what I call a 60-second soapbox. I kind of feel bad because you did such a good job, almost kind of eloquently wrapping things up there. But I'm gonna give you, Coach, a 60-second soapbox. You're welcome to go over 60 seconds because I'm not gonna time you. But I want to give you this last bit here to get out kind of a final thought, a final message, a closing idea, something that you kind of want to just leave the listeners with. It is your soapbox. You can take it any direction you wish. Coach, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor, and I'm going to let you take it from here.
yeah, so I think for my 60-second soapbox, I kind of just want to hit on the player development side. And I think one of the things I see, particularly in AAU, is players really just don't know how to win at basketball, or not inherently focus on how do we win this game per se. I think with the heavy, like me being an analytics guy, being a stats focused guy, I think a lot of players are so focused on like, what do my stats look like? What do I do this? What do I do that? But at the end of the day, one thing that's always rang true throughout like the history books of basketball, and even I kind of when I think about the basketball gods, it's the people who get recognized and get given the more opportunities, the guys who are always winning. I think one of my mentors mentioned to me is that when you start winning, the money will come. So like again, like I said, I think when you think from a player development process, we always have to think about like how do we help these kids utilize their strengths to impact team winning? And I think that has to be more of a focus, more so than like general skill development and all that. Because at the end of the day, we're all doing the same skill development drills. We're all doing X, Y, and Z. We all have our inherent focus. But the one uniform thing that I think would honestly benefit a lot of players at every single level would be just more of a focus in within the player development process, structuring the training session, get into the player's mind of we're doing this to make you a more effective player on the court so you can help your team win, and being more under that umbrella rather than how do we have you show out and score 30 points and grab a ball as live video. So and then if I think for me personally, I'm always going to say the best players always get what they want. And I think in order the best player, you have to be able to say you're winning everything consistently. So if we take that kind of mindset, I really do think that we'll probably develop better players in the future. So that's kind of my 60-second soapbox. I'm not saying winning isn't everything, but we need to understand. I think if we're playing a team sport and what we're trying to contribute to, we need to have that be more of a focus within our player development standpoint, having me shifted towards that rather than how do we show out on the court.
Hearing you say that reminded me of a story a guest a few months ago talked about their guys lost a game and how they were just like happy and joking, like no, it was no big deal on the bus, and just like how much it bothered him. Like, you guys just lost by 15, 20, and you're out here on the bus just joking like nothing mattered, and we just finished playing 10 minutes ago, and you're already past it. It doesn't bother you at all. It's yeah, like I agree. I think especially when these guys and girls, and I don't blame them. They're playing so many games. It's hard to maybe get excited about every single one, but definitely, having wins and losses, matter, competing to try and be the best and have it bother you a bit when you lose, and still have that hunger to want to get better. Even if you win, still wanted to be better, I think would be for the best. So no, that was great. Coach, I really thank you for coming on here, talking about your analytics, talking about 5-out offense, shooting, ball handling, finishing at the rim. A lot of great stuff that you mentioned here. I know that kind of flew by, but this was awesome. I'm really excited to kind of continue to follow your journey and see kind of where you go. You have a lot of doors potentially open for you, and a lot of places you could potentially go on your coaching journey. So, Coach Buaku, I really appreciate it. Best of luck going forward as you continue diving into analytics and wherever your coaching journey continues to take you. And thank you so much for sharing your insight and talking a little 5-out with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on here, coach.
Thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.